I just had a lesson with a student for the first time playing a sonata by Beethoven, which lived with me for the past 40 years and only for a few weeks for him. It was a humbling experience. So much he guesses that he hasn't been told because his musical intuition drove him to it. So what do I do in this sonata number 31? Do I tell him, through my experience, Beethoven fragmented expression doesn't have a flaw in the follow-up of the melodic storytelling. It's fragmented orchestral subsections colorizing differently the elements of a thought that is in a time period 1820 audaciously modern to not be flowing, just like he appears to do that in the opening of the sonata, Beethoven, and then he does something totally In other words, you have even when you hope to reach the climax, so how do you explain that to the student on behalf of the dead composer? Do I have any kind of credentials, like I'm the ambassador of the composer's thought? He told me, I spoke to him. Of course not. It's all about me guessing, him guessing, our intuitions 40 years apart, connected through the intensity of serving one piece. And whatever it means, at which level, philosophical, spiritual, or just factual in terms of how to organize the craftsmanship of it, because it's not only artistry. Well, it is too. A conductor has the freedom to think about the structure and play in his mind whenever the orchestra plays. All the notes, and he goes through the pulse beat notes that are structured, and that structure, in fact, the construction. If you think like this as a pianist, then you don't play the details very well. All depends on the ethic of the practicing. And then back. And if you have, there's very few, if not none, I only had one student who can practice with enthusiasm and dedication and hours of it. That is unbelievable, because then before the concert, I remember her backstage, she's like a rocket ready to take off. The jubilation at such a level has to be nourished in every practicing detail as well as in the performing moment. Most students perform enough to be relatively reassured before the stage, where they're afraid to play in front of the people. And then just before to go on stage, they know that roughly they have 50% this section, 30% the other section, some section more comfortable, 70%. But they know that they have to go through sections that they're not always sure they'll pass through well, cleanly or artistically or whatever it is, the obstacles to pass in front of them. And when you go to cheer them up before the concert, say good luck, do well, concentrate, focus, look forward, don't think backwards, mistakes happen, but you go forward, construct the phrase, the line, the meaning. People are here to be told the storytelling. Don't worry about mistakes. Play precise, and then use the right finger, shift, anticipate, don't play too rush, don't play too fast, or play faster than you can control. Breathe, don't forget to breathe and exhale. Don't hold your breath because you're stressed. Uncomfortable. It's almost, for some students and artists, therefore, already, of course, playing in public is indecent, literally. And it's not presenting themselves indecently. They're usually very beautifully and elegantly dressed. It's not about the body, it's about the psyche, it's about the soul. So much you're vulnerable on stage in psychological terms because you abandon yourself to serve the piece. And sometimes you hang on a pianissimo like on a thread and you go, I want this beginning to be magic, like I just woke up from a dream and I realize how much I dreamed that I thought was real. And then Beethoven extracts it from his own imagination or dream and then interrupts. A trill unmeasured, 30 seconds measured, grace notes not measured. So many details of a transition, and then the theme with an accompaniment. Aria. So we started with quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and the next phrase is 30 seconds. And they're not just rhythms, they're also articulations. Staccato on each first and legato on each second, third, and fourth 30 seconds. And the left hand, staccato in the low register. If you hear it in slow tempo, you don't understand because it is slow tempo. But if you play it in a fast tempo, as you open the piece in a relatively walking tempo, then you hear it this, and you understand that Beethoven is so good at intellectually developing and spreading his thematic material that in fact you hear the opening theme, which was as a chorale, 4 parts or string quartet, first presentation, then aria version with accompaniment, and then orchestral tutti. He doesn't do it, Beethoven doesn't do it so explicit. It would be too obvious. But it's there, spread between the rests, is atomized. And when you build up, you expect that all this going from quarter to eighth to 16 to 30 seconds, the build up of the pulse and the rising will reach the peak, the climax, and that's when you have all of a sudden an interruption of something unrelated, almost like another daydream. Of course you play what you read, but you don't understand where is it going with all that. Beethoven is going in the piece because I know it for 40 years, and he, or my student therefore today, doesn't know it because he only knows it for 3 weeks, which is to say technically not enough, because obviously he has to learn how to organize his fingers, his thinking, his breathing, his articulations, his structure, his tempo. Okay, fine, I gave him a lot of information from my experience about the notation of 3/8, which is Beethoven's chosen meter, but the chosen melodic line every 2 bars, rhythm is 6/8. The closing of the movement is a hemiola of 2 bars of 3/4 in 1 bar of 3/2. 1 is the 2. The rest, and then this is the pulse of the half note becomes the whole note of the next movement, the next half part of the first movement, since Beethoven broke the programs of the official sonata form that he received from Haydn, and broke it. So he uses it as a fantasia. he really is into the Romantic era before the classicism has even finished classically, speaking in terms of chronology. And we can think then that when we finish the first movement, enigmatically he finishes on open third, not in the tonic, and twice the chord with long rest, and again long rest, and then the next movement. And many students don't think about the connection between all of it in terms of pulse, of phrasing, or articulation, of a tonality, because it's relative minor. So it's 2 out of 3 notes of the triad that are the same. But it's not only that, it's just that we think because it's the end of the movement, we need some kind of closure emphatically. So it would have been nice to have at least the tonic, or perhaps that's a bit too dramatizing, but never, why not? But any kind of conclusion, in Beethoven purpose he doesn't give us. He starts with the first note of the sonata in a disposition with the third or the 10th on the top, and he finishes the movement with the same. So always open in expectation. He doesn't start with a tonic, but he has written a movement like that in another sonata. But this is the root position with the tonic in the top, which is more conclusive, especially for the end. He finishes on the 10th or the 3rd on the top, so he doesn't finish conclusively in terms of the harmonic melodic structure. Then he finishes with a hemiola stretching with these enigmatic rests that are stretched because they're half note rests and of quarter note rests in 3/4. And then each of these, I think, half note stretches become the whole note of the next allegro movement. Now, I construct it like that. I integrate them like that. I make them like 2 vessels connecting in the cosmos, as if they're meant to be in this thread of the pulse as a unit between the 2 movements, which could be then 2 half movements or related somehow. So I count 1, 2, 3 for the 3/4. Then I count 2 bars of 3/4 and 3/2. 1, 2, 3, and then I start 1, 2, 3, 4. So what did I do when I taught him that just now? Did I lock him to think like me? Should have I? And I always wonder, because I'm never convinced I do the right thing. I have convictions, but I'm still open to think how best to bring the student to find it out on their own for themselves and figure out, perhaps differently, the connection between the movements. That's not indicated in the score. There is no subtext that says all what I analytically imagine from my experience of knowing the piece. And not many people think this way either. So it's not like I'm just dispensing a fact that is knowledge for everybody. It's my reading, my going through, my experience of life through this enigmatic, beautiful, but not very clearly indication. Perhaps it's meant to be always not totally clear. It's ambiguous in its best as an expression. It leaves you in a daydream. It leaves you in an expectation. That's fine. It's also in Romantic era already, Beethoven foreseeing that the form is not over the mood and the expression of the psychological belonging to the piece. This mood is part of the piece. So I wonder if I respected him enough by giving him my vision of the structural connection between the 2 in pulse, thematic, material, harmonic, and melodic. Or should have I just let him not know what to do with it and see how long it takes him to figure out something on his own? Pedagogically, the second is more on the table, way more interesting. The problem is also that we have, unfortunately, and that is the problem, the macro, the micro, for the detail and the whole. We teach, but we have very few weeks to teach them, because they go to the next degree, next school, next teacher, next whatever, position, perhaps part of their career. They'll become teachers, performers, competitors, whatever they do. We had this time together around the score, which unites us because it's the only thing we have from Beethoven, but his notated intent of his imagination to figure out, as generations before us and generations after us did and will do, what did he want to say? How do I translate this crescendo piano, this rhythmic and other structures? Do they have a connection by themselves, or should I just play them with my intuition? After all, I don't have to play only with my brain. I have to play with my heart, with my soul, with my spiritual uplifting. Should I let him the time to spend more weeks into marinate in it, immerse himself in it? Now, perhaps the quick answer closes the rule of the door for his own thinking of it. I like to think that I try to teach how to build your own lock in order to forge your own key. This analogy works well when you have time in front of you, for the student and for yourself, so that you take the time that it takes for the psyche and the mental connection of things to get to fruition. Perhaps I'm impatient. Perhaps I'm worried I won't have enough time to transmit my experience, so I tell him the things right away. What will he do with all of this? How much will he remember of this first lesson on it in 40 years? Probably very little, if none. He'll integrate him, hopefully, part of his musicianship of the piece, like a particle among many particles that he gets from the internet, from YouTube, from recordings, from other performers. Generally, hearing in our symphony and opera a quartet of Beethoven, and then this or other performers of the same piece, he will, and perhaps he'll teach it and realize some things about it while teaching it. Because you have more time to go in details when you teach, because you have to verbalize things you don't do when you practice for yourself. Or by yourself and for yourself. When you practice with somebody else, you give them the exercises. And there's so many levels that the piece has to be constructed upon, but they have to fit somehow, in layers or in structure, in a harmonious way. You see, I know what I know. I know that what I know can enlighten the understanding of somebody who already intuitively, like this young man, is very driven. Well, I guess the answer would be to ask him. But it's indecent to ask him so early. I perhaps bombarded his intellectual knowledge, understanding, open-mindedness, whatever he has of the piece, with information about what it also is, besides what he sees on the score, and how we can read the intent of the composer, the innuendos that are there through the pulse, the rhythm, the articulation, even the grace notes, which are unmeasured. How do they mean by delaying an important note? There is one section in the first movement when Beethoven draws such a beautiful two-cello dialogue part, and then the answer. Then the other one, and then the answer. But on the right hand, you have the theme in long values with decay. So you wonder how much Beethoven wanted to bring out which. In an orchestration is done by the choice of the instruments. In the piano, you have to do it by the shadow and the lights of the single sound of the instrument. If you do too much of the hairpin expression in the left hand, then the decay of the longer values in the right hand becomes softer and disappears, so you don't hear it anymore. So you're distracted. You hear. And if you're not careful, that's what becomes the fragmentation galore. Now, this I don't think is a fragmentation of Beethoven. This is a superimposition of two accompaniments parts which are in dialogue with themselves, seemingly unconnected to the chorale long values of the theme. So what did he want in the straight-strung piano of Beethoven's time, 1820s, when he composed it? He must have had two different ranges there for different colors, like two clarinets with two cellos. But that we don't have clarinets and cellos on the piano. Okay, we can imagine them. We can extrapolate and say this is what. But then at some point you have to make a choice, activate the piano to bring this, or it's about the choice interpretation. So I gave him the options, I gave him my opinion and my choice as an interpreter. Because after all, I am also a performer. While I'm a teacher, I have to verbalize the untold. When I play, I don't talk, obviously, thankfully. So I play through my playing. I mean, obviously, I speak through my playing. I try to convince through my playing, or perhaps I'm not convincing in my playing or through my playing. But that is the fascinating thing about teaching. And it never ceases to enthuse me, because the piece seems to be old, but in fact completely present and lively. And the student is open and already has an intuitive way of hearing it as if he always knew it. By the musical intuition, call it talent, whatever you want to call it. And I'm the hyphen between the dead composer, the intent, the publisher, the notes, and the supposed to be authenticity or truth towards the interpretation of what Beethoven had in mind, which I'm not supposed to know more than the student, other than by having been around the piece longer than him. But that's not enough, if any. And then he's there discovering how to not only play it, which he can, think it, which he does already, restructure it in his mind. So perhaps if you ask him today, he would not understand what happened. Too much information, perhaps at once, that I gave him about different sections and ways of thinking them and how to organize a bridge and a structural transition, as well as the great thematic expressions of the sonata form that it is, even if it's very loosely so compared to the earlier ones, where he was with the allegro and then the andante. He seems to start with the second theme and then on go into some kind of fantasia, free fantasia form. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to constantly rethink the paradigm of the piece through the fresh new eyes and soulful look from another student, from another generation, from another culture. Put any another you want. But somehow there is a closeness because we serve the same muse and the same piece, and we try to serve it at best because it means to us to serve it right. It means to our audience that we serve them a certain level of our not only understanding but feeling of it, and both, all of it. We become it the moment we play it, ephemeral eternity of the moment that we seek for so much. And I'm a contributor factor for his, no matter how small. Perhaps it's a planted grain in his garden that will blossom at some point with others of the grains, and then he'll have his garden. And we all are the fruit of previously planted seeds in us by our teachers. I hope I did right.